those of you who have been with us before, and we recognize many of your names, know that when the whistle blows in Fort Atkinson, that's our signal to start, and I hear it in the background now, which gives me the opportunity to welcome all of you that have joined us. We have a nice number of you out there, and we appreciate your interest and participation. We're really delighted to have Tom Olberg with Diamond V with us this morning, talking about getting a consistent, efficient TMR out there. And we want to thank Kuhn North America for their support, sponsorship of this webinar. We appreciate that, and the series would not be possible without our sponsors. I should say, perhaps, that I am Steve Larson, one of the editors here at the magazine. And again, we welcome you all, and I'm going to have our partner, Mike Hutchins, down at the University of Illinois, introduce our presenter today. So, Mike, it's all yours.
Steve, very good. Well, welcome all our participants, and again, our thanks to Kuhn for their sponsorship, and happy holidays to everybody out there as well. It is my personal and professional pleasure to introduce our speaker, who I do know quite well, Dr. Tom Olberg. Tom has spent some 28 years in the upper Midwest with a couple of different positions. Most of us will remember Tom with his 13 years with the Monsanto Dairy Business Group, involvement with their product line over here. In 2008, Tom started the TMR audits, and especially since he's joined the Diamond V Mills group over there in Iowa, and that covers the United States and the world. Tom got his bachelor's and master's degree at South Dakota State University and a PhD at The Ohio State University. So Tom, there you got just a ton of stuff in what you've done in the area of dairy cattle nutrition, not only in dairy but other species as well. We welcome you and turn the program over to Dr. Tom Olberg. Welcome.
Thank you, Mike, and again, thank you, Steve, and for Kuhn Knight for sponsoring this event. We'll get started here. What I want to talk to you about is what we've learned from our TMR audits from across the United States the past 6 years. We've got all of our dairy field reps across the U.S. trained to do these, and we're doing a significant number of these audits every week, just from request from folks that have seen the value of these audits and helping their dairies. To kind of outline kind of what we've learned, one key area in terms of, and basically it's talking about reducing the variation in our ingredients before we mix them, and one of the key areas there is our silage phase management basics. And then the crux of the talk, we'll talk about the TMR mixing basics, look at a little bit on refusal rates, and a couple of feed charts that we like to use during our TMR audits, and wrap with some key messages and some entertaining questions. So without further ado, the TMR audit is a value-added service provided by Diamond V to our customers. It looks at feed storage and preparation, the mixing and delivery of the TMR. We also look at ingredient shrink, variation and shrink. And then finally, just utilizing our labor and resources. And the bottom line of it is we're trying to reduce the variation and improve efficiency of the whole feeding operation. Not only efficiency of the feeding or the feed to the cattle, but our labor and our fuel. One of the tools that we use is the Penn State shaker box used to evaluate the TMR consistency, because in reality, we use our eyes, the feeder, the owners, nutritionists, us folks doing these TMR audits, use our eyes to look at the TMR as it is being delivered, and we evaluate the consistency of the particle size. So the Penn State shaker box does that. It's low cost, it's a fair amount of work, but it's low cost. You can do the analysis on the dairy and kind of get an assessment of the consistency of the TMR. One caution, the shaker box does not catch everything. So again, we want to use our eyes to observe some things going on with the TMR, and I'll cover that in a little bit. But basically what we do is we follow a load of TMR as it's being delivered from the beginning of the load to the end of the load along a pen or several pens. We basically just count the number of posts that are in the pen, the main post that supports the rafters, usually is how I do it, and we'll divide the number of posts by 10 and space our samples out to get 10 samples. And we take enough to fill a quart-size Ziploc bag, which is about 400 grams. And then we shake that through each of those samples through the Penn State shaker box. We calculate an average, and we use the standard deviation to calculate a coefficient of variation, and we convert that to a percentage. What we've found, the top 25% of the loads that we've tested across a lot of different types of wagons, the top 25% of the loads will have a coefficient of variation of 3% or less. So anytime we get over 5% CV, we start seeing issues with inconsistent TMRs, and we'll cover that here in a bit. Here's an example. We'll plot these shaker box analyses out so that the dairymen, the nutritionists, the owners of the dairy feeders can get a nice visual of what's going on. So here you can see in the bottom your samples A through J, which are 10 samples, and then the vertical axis is the percent on the screens of the Penn State shaker box. And for lactation rations, we look basically at the middle and bottom screens, which are the purple and yellow respectively. We would like to see these lines flat and straight with essentially no bumps in them. The top screen, we'll look at it, but because it's such a low number, usually in the 5%, 7% change, we get a lot of variability, so we focus more on the bottom middle screens to evaluate our consistency. You can notice here that to the right, the bottom screen goes up and the middle screen goes down. So that means that end of the bunk, those cattle are getting a drier TMR, they're getting more fines. So that can lead to issues with inconsistent rumens, more sorting, and so forth. So it's not consistent. So I want to start out with what we have seen after a typical TMR audit, the kind of responses we'll see. One challenge we have is we don't have a controlled study, university study, where we have a controlled diet with a bad TMR mix versus one where we fixed it with a TMR audit. It's hard to get those kinds of trials, so this is more after the fact. And this particular example is a pretty extreme case. But what we did is we did a TMR audit. The wagon was performing quite nicely, but my eyes could tell me, based on the left here, there's clumps of hay in this TMR, and because of their sampling, we're only taking 10 samples, you can't catch all the inconsistencies, and this is one of the challenges with the shaker box. It doesn't catch everything, so you really need to rely on your eyes to kind of take in the big picture. And obviously on the right hand side, at the end of the 24 hours of feeding, these cows were sorting out the hay, and that was pretty dramatic sorting here. So they were not consuming the hay, which is basically, again, telling us the cows are not consuming the ration that was formulated on paper. And what we convinced, so the routine that this dairyman was using, he was making up 8 loads. It was about a 320 cow dairy. And each load he would grind, the first thing you do is grind about a 3/4 bale of a large bale square, and he would do other things while that bale would mix. So the bottom line of it is he was not consistently processing the hay from load to load to load. And subsequent to this study that we did back in July 2011, we found out that these vertical wagons process hay better when they are filled with hay. So that's what we did. We had him change his routine. I said, just take all your hay that you need for the day, those 7 or 8 bales, put it on the first load and grind it for a set amount of time to where you get your average particle size down to about 6 inches or so. Not down to the size that you want for the cow, but enough to get it so they can load it. And then unload that processed hay on the feeding pad, and then load the processed hay into each load. It's going to be faster, more accurate. And so he did that and followed that, and he is still doing that a year and a half later. And the results of that are shown here on the next several charts. So on the bottom you have the date. It was July 28, 2011 with the TMR audit. And this is ball tank weights. These are actual weights on 320 cows milking. So it's not exactly a high production herd here, but two things to notice here. On the left, you can see a fair amount of variation in the milk tank weights. And then to the right of the arrow where we had the TMR audit, you can see the variation is less, and you can see the bulk tank weights going up. And by the end of the 30 days on a per average cow basis, this herd was up 8 pounds, which is pretty dramatic. I mean, we don't see this on every TMR audit, but it just gives you an idea that, wow, something happened. And the nutritionists made no other changes to the diet other than our processing of the hay and that routine. He did adjust the diet ahead of time there, the first 30 days there to the left. He had the diet formulated to handle heat stress. He had extra DCAD and so forth. And that week following the TMR was one of the hottest periods we had in 2011 summer. So, you know, we had a really extreme heat, and these cows still came out of there. And so I think what's going on here, we just got the hay into the rumen. It was more consistent. We got a better environment, better digestion, and these cattle just took off. Even more dramatic is your fat test on the left-hand side, quite variable. And on the right side, you can see the variability tends to go down, and we can see the fat test go up about 0.07 units by the end of the 30 days, and still climbing, it appears. Even more dramatic is our protein test. You can see on the left, this is bulk tank protein test. A lot of variability, and then after the audit, you can see the variability went out, or was reduced, and our protein test went up. So again, you got to be a little bit cautious here. We didn't have a control set of cows to compare to, but something's going on here after the TMR audit. We think getting that hay processed better was a key. Typically, we'll see it's all anecdotal, and it'd be nice if we could have a control study, but we're hearing 1 to 3 pounds of milk. Sometimes we'll see improvements in consistency. Not only just milk production things, we'll see improvements in reducing the labor, the amount of time needed to load TMRs, and I'll get into that a little bit later. So the first part of this talk is silage space management. One of the keys to reducing variability is how we manage this space to reduce the shrink and reduce nutrient and moisture variability. And more recently, for you folks in the drought area where we know we got top pockets of mycotoxins, one of the where we get high concentrations of mycotoxins in these silage piles, they're not uniform. So the procedure I'm going to tell you will help us dilute these mycotoxins and maybe help us out a little bit with this process. So let me go back to this. What we propose is after you face the silage pile down into a windrow, you take the payloader or a skid steer loader bucket and lift the silage into the central pile and drop it. So by lifting and dropping the silage, we're actually mixing. And that's what we're doing with all of our mixer wagons. Anytime you're seeing a mixer wagon where it's horizontal or vertical or a drum, the way we mix feeds is by lifting and dropping it. So here's a Haylage pile in 2010, I think I did this. I believe I don't remember, it was a couple years ago we did this, where we sampled the face where the guy just faced the silage pile fresh, and I went in with a core sampler and drilled out about 400 grams of sample from each of these silage spots and ran it for analysis right away. Took them into Dairyland labs and had them analyze off the fresh samples. And here we have expressed on a dry matter basis of protein levels. And you can see from high to low, we have about a 7-point spread between the 17.4 and the 24.5 numbers. The reason I bring this up is I've seen feeders, I've seen feed guys take samples right off the face and run moistures on them, call that, and use those to adjust their TMRs. So your TMRs are bouncing around, and we're wondering why we can't get consistent intakes and refusals. So rather than do that, this feeder faced down the silage or the haylage into a windrow, and then he took his payloader, which you can see in the video. He comes across, he's picking up the haylage, and he's dropping it, and you continually to do that, kind of work that silage pile around, and So lifting and dropping the haylage. And so I went in and sampled again. I took 10 samples. They were all off the surface except the second row from the bottom. I reached in as far as my arms could reach, 3 feet or so, and grabbed those samples. So you can see here we narrowed the variability in the protein levels from a 7-point range down to a 3-point range here. So this pile of haylage is more consistent. And I would encourage you to, this is what we do in all of our dairies that we work with, is try and encourage them to make this more consistent. So as we load these buckets of haylage and corn silage into your TMR, your loads of TMR become more consistent across loads and within loads. Let's say we got some mycotoxins in our corn silage pile, or small grains pile, or even high moisture corn. By blending it into this pile, we can help dilute those mycotoxin levels a little bit rather than getting into hot pockets. So especially for you folks in those drought areas, I would highly recommend trying this to help us out a little bit. Won't be the total answer to help us, but something to think about. Final note here, this is where, from this silage pile, we go in with like a 5-gallon pail, grab 10 good scoops of silage, take that pail, dump it out, blend it up again, and take the sample, composite sample from there to do your moistures. For a safety thing, I like these piles, especially with these really large dairies where we got piles that are 45 feet tall. We know that we can have avalanches. I would encourage you to, after you get the pile blended here, go in with a payloader, take a great big scoop, which I think would be fairly representative, and back away from the pile and then take your samples from there. We really got to watch these avalanches and make our people safe. That would be something I would really urge you to try. So here I have a picture of an avalanche. This is a payloader. I guess the only other thing I can tell you from a safety point of view, if it's over 8 feet tall, whether it's a bunker or pile or a pit, I wouldn't go near that unless you're in a cab. So here I have spots, hot spots in the TMR. Where do they come from? I think we have a hot spot here on the left is on the silage pile and ends up in the haylage in the TMR. We know that we've actually witnessed cows nosing around the hot spots, and they'll sort away from those hot spots. So where does it come from? So here we have a silage pile with a loose silage and a rough surface area. We use these infrared cameras. We have 2 of them in Diamond V where we take these photographs. This is 6 hours after this was faced. 80-degree day, not extremely hot, but that loose silage has got a lot of air in it. The wild yeast are coming to life, and they're metabolizing the lactic acid, and in the process are producing a lot of heat. And you can see 136 degrees. You see on the rough surface area, we've got a lot more air exposure, so we got some hot spots. Our same 2 guys in Diamond V repeated this project a year later. A fairly cool day, but this is 6 hours after they faced. You can see on the left, they faced it with a skid steer loader. It's sort of rough, and then they did a grinder where it's really smooth. And again, you have your loose silage. So 6 hours later, you see this. And we know that these smoother surfaces will have less heating. One minor note here is some of the folks that are using easy rakes, which leave more of the vertical ridges in the TMR or in the silage faces. We have not seen a huge issue with those as far as heating. And we've seen with the easy rakes, they really speed up the whole silage facing and helps that feeder out in terms of time management. But we don't think the easy rakes have caused any extensive heating of the silage face. So this is another step in reducing that shrink and helping us on the silage. Here's an example of a dairy where you can see at the top of the pile right by the tires, they pitched off the spoiled feed, they faced it down and put it in this pile. And it makes it a lot more consistent. So I have a question. So that's kind of on the silage face management. That's one of the things I would highly recommend. Facing the silage pile, blending in the pile will help us manage the variability in our TMRs. So now we're going to go into the TMR mixing basics. And as we evaluated these TMRs, I have a question for you, and I would like to have you think about what % of the TMRs have been mixed. I think I haven't mixed properly, is what it says, because my so I have a few minutes. What % do you think have been mixed correctly? 0, 30, 50, 70, or 100%? Give you a few.
The polls are open, Tom. So we're off and voting here. So they'll get about 30 seconds. 30 seconds. This it keeps the Republicans out of the voting, you see, because they vote slower at this point. We're up to 63%.
Tom, one question I have on this, that you covered the bunkers real well. Are there some things that those of us with upright silos or bags can do to make for more consistency, like maybe doing some pre-mixing, like you suggest? That might be something that people might be interested in.
So the upright silos where you have the grinders going around the top and bringing that down, you're probably getting pretty consistent silage. The only thing there is your time. So just getting that done ahead of time before we all start feeding, I think, will help us. Ag bags, excellent question. A lot of times we have our ag bags quite a ways. Usually they're out away from the feed center in a lot of cases. And so we see a lot of folks hauling the silage back and forth from the ag bags up to where they're mixing, or they'll actually take the wagon out there. And we know we have a lot of variability in the ag bags from the front to the back just because of field conditions and so forth. What I've seen guys do, they'll actually take the TMR wagon down to the first thing in the morning, load up all the haylage they need for the day. They may be a couple of loads depending on the size of the dairy, and let it mix just for a couple of minutes, and then unload it back up by the feed center where they're loading the corn silage. That would be one recommendation, so that you can have the haylage more consistent from one end to the other, because it varies a lot. That's a great question. So that would be the one thing I would try. Be careful there, though, if you got sharp blades in your vertical wagons. It doesn't take much, but just the fact that you're lifting and loading it and moving it will help blend it. Let it roll out in the windrow and then push it in a pile. It sounds like extra time, but I think it will bode you well in terms of making those TMRs more consistent. And what we've learned, what Dairyman tell us after they've attended the seminar and start doing these blending into the piles, they see more consistent refusals and dry matter intakes. So, Mike, do we have the results of the poll?
Yep, here are the results. Write these down if you wish. Tom does not see these. At the 30% number, 16% of the people thought 30% of the TMRs have mixing issues. 1/3 of them, 33%, thought 50% of them had mixing issues, and a whopping 46% thought 70% had mixing issues, and 5% of the Democrats thought it was 100%. So what's your take on that, Tom?
Well, what we found, this is based on when we do our TMR audits, we assess the loads, and what we have found is based on our audits across, it's about 400 TMR loads, and we've got a lot more, and we'll keep this updated. But right now, we're seeing 70% of the loads having issues, 70%. And that could be biased, so the numbers are not exactly a perfect poll, but a lot of times when we get called on a TMR audit, we're having issues. But a lot of times we're on dairies, too, that do an excellent job, and we'll usually find something. And so the next part of my talk, I want to go into those issues. So so what was the highest percent? What percentage had the highest percent of respondents, Mike?
It was 70%.
Very good. Very good. So folks are having a good awareness here. We'll move on to the next slide. What we see of TMRs, we have identified seven mixing issues. And what we discovered 30% of these total TMRs, we find no issues. They've done an excellent job. So in other words, the bottom and middle screens of the Penn State shaker box is about 30% or less, excuse me, 3% CV or less. The one that we see a lot, 25% of the time almost, is worn parts, worn kicker plates, worn out mixers. The other one we see a lot is when you add the last ingredient to the load, which is usually corn silage, they do not allow enough time to get that silage blended. We see low quality hay processing being an issue, especially in the upper Midwest and the Northeast. Overfilling. Unlevel wagons can create problems. I'll have video to show you that. And then if we're adding liquid directly to the TMR, we got to be careful. I'm a big proponent of adding liquid, whether it's water, liquid whey, or molasses, but we got to do it correctly because we really think it helps on sorting. The other one is mix order, which is a really tough one because that can change from day to day depending on our hay and our haylage, and so there's really not a set order on that, but that's the one that probably has the most flexibility in terms of changing. But all these we have found have created issues with TMR mixing. So I'd like to go through each of these to give you a little more background. The first video here, if you see it, is a twin screw vertical wagon. You can see the front screw on the left there working, and the back screw is barely working, and you see a bunch of silage, and actually it's refusal is being made for a low group. Looks like a pocket gopher's digging in this thing. He's making his little ring and a amount of dirt here, but this TMR has a kicker plate that is absolutely worn out. And they fixed the kicker plate, and this herd of about, it's close to 2,000 cows, a lot of fresh cows. They were up with 3 pounds of milk within a matter of days after they fixed the kicker plate. Here's another video. My colleague in Wisconsin, Mitch Diamond, took this video on a TMR audit. Again, 2 issues here. One is the wagon is wore out. It's not doing a very good job of mixing. And the second one, as we pan over to the right here, you see the grain, there we go, on top. And this is one where the grain, they pull up to it's the last thing. It's one of those convenience things for the feeder or the owner. They dump the grain on top, so we have a mixed order problem. The grain should have been added earlier. So any concerns here, folks? If the next slide will show this. Here we go. So we dumped the load, and at the beginning of the load here, we see all this grain. And this is, and you can actually see clumps of haylage on down in the background of this TMR. So anytime you see a TMR with this, we have a problem. It's not correct. There is an issue. And there's several causes for this, but we know here is we got a mix order problem, and we have a worn out mixer, and you can see the clumps of haylage in the background there. When you see that, there's an issue. There's something wrong. And we're trying to convince folks that when you see this, you need to take action. Another one is just keeping the blades sharp on vertical wagons if you're processing a lot of hay and straw. That's critical. We've seen issues with this, and just doing a good routine maintenance on these. This blade on the left has nice serrations. The blade on the right does not. It's like a steak knife. The blade on the right is pretty sharp. You rub your fingers across the edge, it will cut your finger, but it doesn't do a very good job of cutting the hay or grabbing the hay and cutting it. The one I mentioned is mix time. What we have here is some work out of Kansas State. Joe Harner did this and his colleagues, where they were looking at a swine diet, I believe, is a mash or a meal, dry diet. On the left-hand vertical side, you have the coefficient of variation and the salt content done a couple of different ways. And on the bottom, you have time and mixing. And what they found, there we go, around 5 minutes, and so they have the dotted line horizontally at about 10%. And so here we have, they did 10 samples. That's a routine now protocol for the feed industry is to take 10 samples for a load of mix. And salt's a common ingredient used to test the mixing proficiency. And 10% is their line that they use, like in the poultry and swine industry, feed industry. And after about after 3 or 4 minutes, we're getting down to that 10% range. But you notice at 5 to 6 minutes, that line flattens out and maintains at about 5% coefficient variation, which kind of matches up with our TMR audit, or their TMRs. So that mix time is critical in getting consistency. How do we get this? To do that, if you're using a feed software program, you can program a mixing pause. Here's an example where they're counting down from 5 minutes. So it's critical to have these. Sometimes we can have mixing pauses or processing pauses in the middle of the mix to help break up, say, feed chunks or whatever. It all depends, but I'll have an example here to show you in a second. Here's a case study I did earlier this year. And basically we know that we're using these 7 factors, so we can use it as kind of a debottlenecking of the TMR consistency. So it was a dairy, about 1,000 cows. The nutritionist asked me to come in and evaluate. They were inconsistent. And I could see that the one pen was getting pretty much all the fines. At the end of one load, they were dropping TMR to 4 different pens. And the thing I noticed were these large clumps of haylage, and in the right here in the shaker box, you can see the light-colored wet cake of corn. It was corn blended with wet whey like the afternoon before, and then we'd load that. And so the routine was, the next slide here, on the left-hand side here, that was a routine. They would have the wagon off, they would load the silage, mixer was on in low gear, and then they loaded the pre-mix, which was their commodity mix of dry ingredients, and they would load this corn wet cake, and they would mix for 2 minutes. So immediately I ruled out several things that I thought were not causing problem. The wagon was brand new, so it was not worn out. The wagon was level. That was not an issue. The hay was processed through the pre-mix, so the hay was well processed. The liquid was blended in with the corn. So here we have the 5 factors that I ruled out, and the only thing we had left to evaluate was mixing time, which was only 2 minutes, and mix order. So the first thing on the next load, I had him just add 2 minutes more to the mix time, made it 4 minutes, and we cut the variation in half. And then finally on the last load, or the third load here on the right hand side, we changed the mix order because this corn wet cake was not getting broke up, and the pre-mix was not getting blended correctly. So I had him loaded right away, turn the wagon on, put a mix pause about 1.5 minutes in, and then load the corn silage and haylage, and then mix for 4 minutes. And you can see on the next chart, what I have here is a chart that we use in a lot of our TMR audits, and so it's kind of busy here, but you can see on the very left-hand side, you got 3 bars there, 6.7. That's the average of the top screen, and then I have the variation, the coefficient of variation for the top screen, the averages for the middle screen in that 37, 38 range, the variations there you see, and then finally the bottom screen. Just looking at the top screen, for example, on the very first load where we were only mixing 2 minutes and we had a mixing problem, we had terrible variation. And actually, let's go to the middle screen. Variation where it starts out there at 14.2%. That's terrible. We hardly ever see TMRs that bad. And then by adding 2 more minutes, 4 minutes to the mix time at the end of the load, we dropped that variation basically in half. And then when we did the combination of mix order and mix time, we cut the variation back down to 3.1. That was based on 10 samples. I mean, dramatic improvement in consistency to TMR. The challenge has been the difficulty in trying to follow up with the dairy to see what the cows are doing, but I know it had to help these cows. I mean, this is one of the most dramatic improvements in TMR consistency I've done in my 6 years. but we were able to troubleshoot the 2 factors causing the problem by a process of elimination. We know these 7 factors. I eliminated the other 5 I knew were not an issue and honed in on here. And we had this thing solved in about 2 hours. So here you should see 2 videos running at the same time. These are 2 wagons, the same wagon, excuse me. It's a twin screw vertical. The wagon on the left, you can see the cottonseed kind of building to the front. It's not moving. And on the right-hand side, you can see the cottonseed and everything is mixing quite well. And on the next slide, you can see on the left, you can see the wagon that was not set up correctly, and on the right, you can see one that was set up correctly. And basically, all it was is the wagon on the left was not level. And we unhooked the wagon, adjusted the hitch so the wagon was level when it was being loaded and mixed, and you can see the results of that on the right-hand side. Now, that's on level wagons. We know that the heavy, dense feed particles go to the lowest spot in the wagon, and they'll hang out there even though the wagon has these very powerful augers lifting and throwing and mixing the feed. The heavy material will go to those areas. We actually will see liquid hang up in those areas as well if it's not added correctly. There is one other cause, or a couple of other causes for these clumps of, as you saw earlier, if you got a worn out kicker plate that doesn't clear the grain away from the front door of the wagon, you can get these piles of grain. So sometimes it's due to the wagons not being level, or sometimes it's a worn out kicker plate. Suffice it to say, if you see this, it's not normal, something's wrong, we need to fix it. This is just a picture of how we recommend adding liquid to a TMR. We like to use these spray bars to spread that liquid out and get it evenly distributed across the wagon. We've had actually really good luck of adding these liquids to your premix, which is a dry grain. Challenge with that though, if you're using water and it's really hot out, water can heat up, so that gives you, that may be limited. But we've had pretty good luck with a liquid whey or even molasses even added to these premixes. And what we found is that it really speeds up the loading of the TMR, because anytime you're adding liquid directly to TMR, it's at least a 5-minute process. On these really large dairies where they're mixing 20, 30, 40, 50 loads of TMR, 5 minutes a load, that's a lot of time savings for these guys or these feeders. The challenge though with adding liquid to the premix is you may not have the stickiness with the liquid to the small particles and the big particles, and help us reduce sorting. But we think, at least our opinion in Diamond V, that the amount of time savings you have with putting the liquid in with the premix is pretty huge. And if we can find another way to reduce sorting, I think it'll help us. But we're seeing just really good luck putting this liquid in with the premixes. So here we have a real auger wagon, and I guess I could have had a good poll question here: is this thing mixing or not? And you go back to my first comment about mixing feed, is it has to be falling, and you can see clearly here the feed is not falling. It's actually getting packed. This is high moisture corn in with the Haylage, and it's not being mixed. Here's a proper mixing of a horizontal real wagon. You see the nice clearance there between the TMR and your rails. Feed is falling and mixing. This is what you got to shoot for. The challenge with real wagons is that they're great wagons. They're great for mixing up small loads. A lot of dairies are using them for those dry cow, fresh cow, heifer rations, because they're usually smaller rations. The downside is you get really wet rations. They can fill up really fast, and in some cases you can only fill them to about 70–75% of maximum capacity. So, which makes the whole feeding process a little less efficient. So I wanted to show you this. This is a horizontal wagon. Basically, keeping it real simple. Anytime we're over the top of the metal, we're too full. It's just not mixing. You can see the wind. This is western Minnesota. The wind is taking this hay. They'll never find that TMR again. A lot of shrink here. And we changed this load size, and we could tell with the shaker box we improved the variability by cutting the load size back on this by about 3,000 pounds. It really helped this TMR. Here's another one. The vertical wagons, they can be overfilled as well. This is a load of TMR going to the high group of cows, about 50 to 60 days in milk. That's corn silage going over the top, and that bubble of corn silage never disappeared out of my sites. It never got blended. And so we know a lot of these dairies that where we don't do a good job of mixing, and anytime we're overfilling the wagons, it's going to take a lot more time to mix, and in some cases never gets mixed. As a result, a lot of these cows are getting pure corn silage, and we wonder why the cow's performance is not matching the projections on paper, and it just goes right back to watching these guys load. Any of you using hand ads where we're using a lot? This is a load of TMR, and the guy's adding 40 pounds of rumen bypass fat. Nothing wrong with the rumen bypass fat, but we have a problem with it going to get mixed. This is a triple screw wagon, 37,000 pound load of TMR. I ask you how many cows got this bypass fat. The nutritionist saw this and immediately made a call to get the bypass fat blended into your into the premix at the plant. So this leads us to we've actually done some work in this at Diamond V, looking at the optimum mix procedure, I guess, of ingredient. And we went off the literature. Norman St. Pierre had recommended 2%. Richard Zinn had recommended 2%, and so we use that as a standard, which means that's 40 pounds of a hand ad per ton. And we did a little study. We did a 40 pound per ton, and we did a 10 and a 2.5. And what we found was it was consistent with what they recommended, that the 40 pound ton hand ad, so in other words, if you're adding the 2% had the most consistent. It was significantly better than the other two, and we didn't see much difference between the other, the 10 and the 2.5. But the 40 pound per ton treatment was more consistent, significantly better than the 10 and the 2.5. And what that tells us, if you take 2% and take the inverse of that, so that's a ratio of 50 to 1. So anytime we're adding like a 50 pound bag of rumen bypass fat, you need to add it earlier in the mix where the load size would not be more than about 2,500 pounds. Probably need to add it to ingredients that are similar in particle size, like a dry grain. Had a case here last week where the guys were mixing up a heifer ration, and the only option they had there was corn silage and some type of a forage. I said, well, put in a bucket of corn silage that would say be 2,500 pounds, and then dump in the bypass fat, or excuse me, their mineral mix for the heifers, to get that blended and let it blend for maybe a minute, 2 minutes to get that mixed. Because if you wait to add the premix or a 50 pound bag at the end of the load, it'll never get mixed, and not all the cows are getting the benefit. So a lot of times we hear, well, this particular feed additive didn't work, or my mineral's not working, the cows aren't performing. Start asking questions. Are we using hand ads? And if you are using a hand ad, how is it being mixed? Just some real simple things here. Just making sure we're loading on center on vertical wagons. This is a twin screw. Pass does a nice job here. They got the red dot in the middle. And you can see on the next slide where he didn't do that, the hay and the cottonseed hung up on top of the screws, and really didn't get blended into the TMR until at the end. And as a result, we saw the hay not get processed and the cottonseed not get mixed properly. So load in the proper position on these wagons. Here's another issue with vertical wagons that we see. This is a case where this thing is loaded, and this is for a close-up mix for dry cows. And what we've learned on these vertical wagons, if you don't fill to the top of the screws, all these feed ingredients that are hung up on the flighting will not get knocked off. and get blended. And so we followed this load through, and sure enough, these ingredients didn't get knocked off. So one of the things I tell folks is they ask about different wagons. My recommendation is anytime you want to try out a new wagon, bring it home, demo the wagon, and test your smallest load and your largest load to see if you mix it. So this is a real challenge here. The guy did everything he could to get this mixed off. He speeded up the wagon and as high as he could on the RPMs, and still wouldn't get it off. So this is a real challenge. And so some wagons do a really good job, and so I encourage you, as you're working with your clients, or if you're a dairy producers, try different models and brands. Some do a better job of blending and throwing the feed off. I will say this, in all of our TMR audit experiences, pretty much all the brands, all the types of horizontal and vertical wagons all do a good job of mixing TMRs as long as you follow the basics. Those 7 things that I mentioned earlier. We haven't really seen any one particular brand fall off. We've had a couple of issues with certain models not working, but those companies have worked on that and made newer models that are working just great. So here's a poll question. So just to kind of review to see if you have not put you to sleep here. Which of the factors causes a TMR to be inconsistent? Worn out mixer wagons, overfilling, not mixed long enough after last ingredient, poor silage space management, all of the above.
Okay, the poll's now open, so we voting is actively going on here. We're over 50%. We're Tom, you really got them voting. Hurry at this point. So we'll give you the results here in about 10 seconds. We're at almost 70%, and that's when we shut her off at this time. So, Jim, we're going to shut it off, and you are going to find that 93% of the people said all of the above at this point, and the others all received about 2%.
All right. Well, that all the above is the correct answer. The poor silage face management does contribute to that, and in addition to the other 7 factors that we saw with regarding to mixing the actual TMR. So great job, and sounds like most folks are staying awake here.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. So actually, I think just a couple of things on setting up your wagons. Make sure you got proper setup on the hitch. Make sure they're level. One comment here is if you ever have to repair the wagons, like vertical wagons, and take out the augers and replace those with new augers, make sure you have those timed correctly, follow the manufacturer's recommendation, because you can have problems with mixing and unloading with that. We like to see 3 to 5 minutes after the last ingredient. 3 minutes might be a little short. We did some work earlier on, and we know on twin screw vertical wagons it takes at least 3 minutes to move product from one end to the other. So probably more work is needed on this area. The challenge is on larger dairies where we add another. You got to be really careful in these recommendations. So if you add another minute and they're mixing 50 loads, we just added almost an hour to the feeder's day. So we got to be, if you make these recommendations, make sure we follow through and do, say, a set of shaker boxes to see if we're improving consistency. Don't overfill. I would say keep it to the top of the metal, if not a little bit below. On 4 auger wagons, just a little bit above the top of the augers, just so you can see the feed moving. On rail wagons, make sure we got good space between those rails and the feed. Watch how we're loading on the wagons. Liquids, use spray bars, and I really encourage you to use, if you're using a commodity bay and using a lot of commodities, we really encourage you to use some pre-blends if you, the nutritionists will allow you to do that. It gets to be a little bit of a challenge if we're a real high production herds and we got a, say, a high group and a low group. how do we manage that? Do we have enough space in the commodity base to handle those premixes? But we really see these premixes helping the organization and speed of mixing. And basically on all of our audits, we have a goal, and it's not for everybody, but a goal of 15 minutes or less to load your TMR, and then 15 minutes or less to deliver the TMR would be a nice goal. We have found in some of these TMR audits, the guys are taking 45 minutes to over an hour to load their wagons, and that just I think we can do better than that. But in some cases we can't, just because the dairy is older and they got to go around and add load up feed ingredients at different spots. But that would be the experiences that we've seen. On larger dairies, most of the folks are graining the hay ahead of time, the straw ahead of time. It's just way more efficient, faster. We cut to shrink, as long as you have a place to put the hay in and keep it out of the wind. One area that we've been working a lot, and we don't have all the answers on this, is with the high feed prices, where can we cut our costs? One of the areas is looking at lower refusals. Here's a dairy that we tracked over time. We're working with a feed software company, and we like working with all the feed software companies, but over time you can see the green bar going from left to right. Dry matter intake is going up, and at the same time they reduced the refusals from, say, about 3.5% to 2.5%. Not for everybody, but they were able to cut some feed here. A lot of our dairies are feeding those refusals back to a low group or a heifer group, and that's fine. I just question whether or not that's the best use of our feed dollars. And then the other thing I see is a lot of variability in these refusals, especially if they're sorting. You know, is that the best way to do this? We know in the feedlot industry, these guys, they feed the really slick bunks. I'm not sure we want to go there, especially with our fresh cow and high group rations, but I think there's some opportunity here. Here's another one where dry matter intakes are pretty flat across the top. You can see here in the red line, though, they were able to cut out about 1% in their refusal rates. So using current cost of 16 pounds per pound of dry matter, if I did my math right, there's about 8 cents savings per cow per day. So something to think about. What is the optimal refusal rate? It really depends on the dairy, and I think the keys to doing this is having the same person read the bunks. You need to read them right ahead of before you feed. And I think the other thing I really encourage is try to weigh those refusals or those weighbacks. And the other thing that's critical is they got to have consistent reading of the moistures on your Haylage and corn silage or any wet ingredient. If you're not monitoring moistures consistently, then it's going to be really, really hard to feed to a low bunk or a low refusal or a tight bunk. The other thing to watch out for is consistent feed delivery times. If you're not consistent, because we're unorganized in the feed center and it's taking more than an hour to load a TMR wagon, I would be very cautious to go into a lower refusal rate. Here's an example where the other thing on refusal rates is we see a lot of guys adjusting the refusals up and down too much. Here's some work from Bill Stone where you can see the dry matter intake curve is very flat, and they adjusted the refusals up and down only by 1/2 pound of dry matter per cow per day. Whereas the previous chart I showed you here, they were adjusting the orts up and down by the amount of orts. So in other words, if they're up 500 pounds, they would drop the next load by 400 pounds and bouncing around. And as a result of that, you can see quite a change in dry matter intake. So we're working with some of the feed software companies on some of the charts we like to look at, and I think I'm going to hold off there and take questions.
Okay, well, very good. Well, we've got a few questions here, Tom, that we'll go through, but I think I'll turn it back to Steve to kind of wrap up the formal part of the presentation.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Tom, for a great presentation. You covered a lot of ground and did it very well, very interesting, and some real useful take-home points for a lot of people, and they've stayed with us very well. So we certainly want to thank you. We also want to thank Kuhn North America for their sponsorship of this webinar. I want to mention to those of you joining us today that here shortly you'll receive by email a very short 7-question survey that we would love to have your participation in. I like the survey because once you vote, you find out how everybody else voted. It makes it kind of interesting. And the other thing is there'll be an opportunity for everyone on that survey to make suggestions about future webinars or anything that we can do to improve our webinar series. And especially today, this is the first time we've used video clips as part of our webinars. And if you were able to see those and make use of them, that's fine. If there were some problems with, depending on your internet access and so forth, if there were some problems, we'd like to know about that as well. Also, the webinars are posted on the archives. This one will be up again by the end of the week, and all of the past archives are available. All of the past webinars, I should say, are part of our free archives. And to date, we've had about 16,000 people view archive webinars over the past 2 years. We're really proud of that interest in our series. As always, our thanks to our co-host Mike Hutchins and his sidekick Jim Baltz down there at the University of Illinois, who makes sure that everything goes the way it's supposed to. And Tom, some of the comments you made today just recently about grouping strategies and waybacks and so forth just fits in real well with our next webinar, which will be on January 14th, Monday, January 14th. Mike Hutchins will be the featured presenter. He's going to be talking about today's perspectives on grouping strategies, which will just kind of carry this whole emphasis forward. Digistar will be the sponsor of that webinar. And Mike, there are some questions.
Yes.
I'll bounce it back to you.
Very good, Steve, very good. Well, listen, here we go, Tom, and we'll rip these off pretty quickly here. You mentioned a special camera to take the heat pictures. Where do you get one, and what does it cost to have that type of technology?
Yeah, Fluke is the name of the company, F-L-U-K-E. The cost of the cameras is around $7,000, so they're not a cheap deal. And we've got 2 of those in Diamond V group, so I can get that information to you, Mike, and you can forward that on.
Okay, very good. Another quick question. When you add the last ingredient is water, is 3 to 5 minutes enough mixing time when you're adding the water, and when does that time really start?
So that time starts when the last drop of water goes in, and 3 minutes with water, depending on the load, and then if you're not using a spray bar, I would say 3 minutes is not enough, and even longer may not be enough, because you get this water really sticks to the TMR, and it just takes a long time. So 3 minutes would be the absolute minimum, and we probably need more work in that area, but I would say more in the 5 to 6 minutes would be probably better. Again, you're using your shaker box or some type of way to evaluate how well that's mixed would be a good thing to do to fine-tune your mixing.
Using a horizontal mixer, what is the proper time for mixing of the last ingredient? Make sense to you, Tom?
Yep. So basically, the last time after last ingredient, we're pretty consistent across all types, whether it's horizontal or vertical. I would say like at least 3 minutes. And so we use the same amount of time recommendation on the horizontals we do the verticals. I would say, though, on our horizontal, especially the foggers, I think they tend to move slower. You may need a little more time on those. Whereas your reels, if they're not overfilled, 3 to 5 minutes would be very good, I think.
Tom, could I interject? We're right at the end of our hour, and Tom and Mike, let's keep this going. If there are some other questions that can be addressed, but we just want to sign off again and thank everyone for their participation. Thanks for being with us today, and thanks to you, Tom, for your good job, and also to Kuhn. Tom, back to you, Mike. Are there some other questions?
Yes, there are. We'll go through these. Tom, you got a piece of paper and pencil there for you, with you. Here's a case study for you. A 12,000-pound load, and here are the ingredients, and they want to know what you recommend for mixing order. We have grass hay, alfalfa hay, a premix, mineral, 80-pound mineral, corn silage, wheatlige, and water. Do you need to go back through those again, or do you have them,
got
Tom?
'em. We got grass, alfalfa, premix, mineral, corn silage, wheelage. So my first question: what type of wagon? Is it vertical or horizontal?
Okay, we don't have that. What would
So the horizontal, it's a vertical.
It's vertical. Yep.
Okay, so the grass and alfalfa are good. As I'm assuming they got to process that. The premix, boy, there's not much you can do here. This order looks good actually. This would be very consistent with what we see, and I don't have any other suggestions here. I guess my question would be: has there been a concern, or this would be very typical because you got your premix in there, which is a nice carrier for that mineral to bring in. I agree with that. And corn silage and wheelage, and generally we see the liquids go in last, but that's another area that we need to investigate more. We're not sure. The problem with adding water with dry ingredients, they can clump, and so adding the water after the wetter material, corn silage and wheelage, this is good. So based on my knowledge, this order should be adequate.
Okay. This is with a tumble mixer, Tom. Can we mix a tumble
Yep.
mixer now
Yep.
without knives? Can
Yep.
we mix too much to the point of breaking the integrity of the fiber with that type of a mixer?
So
the
tumble
question is,
mixer basically is I have an auger in the middle, but basically that's kind of like a cement mixer. The one is they can easily be overfilled, and with TMRs, we have not seen the overmixing issue like you can see with a dry meal ration, like for swine or poultry diets. You can actually overmix them and have your minerals settle out. The only exception here would be in the dairy side, is where we're making up our commodity blends. So where there we're working a lot of fine ingredients, a lot like a meal. So there you could potentially overmix, but I have not seen that yet. It's usually they're undermixed. But with TMRs, where you got blade or no blades, the people are always concerned about breaking down the particles, but with an auger like that, I have not seen it.
Somewhat of a different kind of a question. What happens if you add the mineral first before adding other ingredients? Is there a problem that it's not going to get picked up with your mixer?
Yeah, that would be a concern. I would want to have a protein or a grain mix in there ahead of time. Absolutely.
I think you may have answered this rather long question, Tom, but let me read it to it quickly for that person. With upright silos, that sometimes takes 20 or 30 minutes to load the mixer. There's no knives in the mixers, by the way, and the mixer runs all the time as far as that goes. How long of an active mixing should we be looking for a good mix?
So, one thought here is anything we can do to cut fuel would be something to think about. The challenge here is I'm assuming the silo unloader is unloading directly into the wagon. But if not, I would take a look at dropping all my silage and then loading with a skid steer or something. It'd be much more efficient in terms of labor. Now, the concern here is the wagon is running for 20 minutes while we're loading. One, it's just wasting a lot of fuel, and I think as fuel prices are going up, that's something we need to look at. And there is a potential of now if there's no knives in this, I doubt that we're getting a lot of breakdown particles, but I suppose you could potentially get. We haven't really looked at it too much with upright silos.
Tom, I got a 5,000 cow dairy herd here and says, how many loads do you evaluate when doing an audit? And then how often do you recommend doing the audits? I'm not sure the herd size is critical, but certainly a factor.
Yeah, so we've certainly done a number of these on that size dairy. And we've actually, so how many loads we test, it kind of depends. In my earlier days when I didn't know as much about what's going on with TMR audits, I've done as many as 7 loads in a day, which is next to crazy. Now I'm a little more selective. If we see an opportunity, like for example, the guy's not mixing long enough, well, that's an easy change to make on the fly. We can adjust that, and what we like to do is find those teachable moments where we didn't mix long enough versus mixing ideally, and compare those results and show them to people. So we may, now I'm only doing maybe 3 or 4 loads to have those teachable moments. As far as repeating a TMR audit, what we're really encouraging dairies to do, and we've got a couple doing this, is although it's not an extensive TMR audit that Diamond V would do, but a lot of we got some dairies now will take TMR samples from every pen or every load. Let's say they have 12 pens. They take 3 samples per day for the whole week, and they'll do a shaker box on the fresh TMR, and then they'll do a shaker box on the refusals 24 hours later, and just track those things over time. And they've been able to catch a lot of things before we do another TMR audit, which I hate to put a time on it. I've got a couple of operations up here where I work with. We've done them twice a year, but I encourage the dairy to develop their own internal audit system. And I guess my final, or one of my comments to the audience and to Dairyman is, what type of system do you have on your dairy to monitor TMR consistency? And, obviously we can't get to every dairy in a timely basis, and if you're waiting for a TMR audit and something's happening, we're losing dollars on performance. So I would encourage some type of a way to monitor your TMRs, and then if you can't get the answers or your answers to your questions, and consult with some of the Diamond V reps. But that would be our experience, Mike.
We're down to our last 2 questions, Tom, and I'll hold us to that. From my Italian listener, he says, haven't heard much about the weighing system itself. Any thoughts about that? I assume he's referring to the
load cells.
Of the scale.
Yeah, the scale heads and so forth. Yeah, that's part of our TMR audit process too. Is the maintenance is really encourage a routine maintenance, a daily maintenance thing, and one of those things is just looking inside the wagon. One of the things we like to do is check the load cell accuracy, just simply hanging a known amount of weight on each corner of the wagon, checking to make sure those load cells are reading consistently within 5 to 10 pounds. And if not, we recommend the dairyman to call the scale head company, whether it's Weightronics, Digistar, or DG. I think that's the 3 main companies, and they actually can help you calibrate that. That's another area that we'd like to maybe help a little more on too. But yeah, definitely need to check those because you can be off.
The last question is, what length of chop do you recommend for processing hay and slash straw ahead of going into your mixer?
Yeah, okay, great question. So hay, we got solid stems, so you got to be careful there. Basically, when you get hay in the final TMR mix, we like to see it the width of the cow's mouth. I don't know whose quote that is. It's yours, Mike, or Randy Shavers, but one of you. That's what we like to see. So when grinding hay, you need to have a little bit longer than that. I would say the average length would be about 6 inches or so. By the time you put it into a premix or in a TMR, you're going to get it broken down to where the cow can eat it and not sort it. Straw, we have hollow stems. Straw floats much more in the rumen than hay. We like to see that ground down to 2 inches or so, and really, about the half of the chop length of hay, and we see really good results. That's the other thing we'll see in these TMR audits. We see a lot of sorting. I think it's a way underestimated problem, and that's why we've been pretty aggressive with making sure this hay gets processed and that straw gets processed correctly. And that'd be my experience and thoughts on it, Mike.
Well, Tom Oberg, you did yeoman's job, and we taken you into overtime, but we still have over 50 people listening to us, so that's pretty amazing.
Great.
Anyway, our thanks to Tom and Steve. We'll turn it back to you for any final benedictions, but happy holidays to everybody.
Yes, and Mike, we'll see you tomorrow. Yes, thanks to everybody for joining us again today. Happy to have you stay with us. Tom, you did a great job, great practical information, and
Well, thank you very much.
We appreciate that job very much. And from all of us here at Hoard's Dairyman, happy holidays to all of you, and we hope to have you back with us again on January 14th when Mike Hutchins is the presenter talking about grouping strategy. So until then, happy holidays and best wishes to you all out there.
Thanks.